This morning, the federal government will announce an inquiry by the Productivity Commission into what the rest of the world is doing to put a price on carbon. The study will look at direct carbon pricing as a result of carbon taxes or emissions trading, as well as other less transparent carbon pricing imposed by renewable energy targets and subsidies for low emission technologies. The inquiry will report back by May next year, and it comes as the OECD urges Australia to move quickly to bring in a carbon price. Greg Combet is the Minister for Climate Change and Energy Efficiency. He's in our Parliament House studio. Minister, good morning.
How are you, Fran?
Well, thanks. Minister, why are you asking the Productivity Commission to take a look at this?
Because it's clear that many countries around the world are taking steps to reduce carbon pollution, and in fact, under the Copenhagen Accord, now 85 countries representing 80% of global emissions have pledged under the Accord various targets and actions to reduce carbon pollution. So it's clear that many countries are doing things. Australia is certainly not out on its own, and I think it's time to get a bit more rigour into really assessing what effective carbon price exists in countries with which we trade, so that we're able to properly assess things like the competitiveness of Australian industry that are trading with those countries in the context of us introducing a carbon price ourselves. So we'll be asking the Productivity Commission to have a look at the effective carbon price in the UK, in the United States, in Germany, New Zealand, China, India, Japan and South Korea. And I think it'll be one of the first most detailed studies. We saw a study similar in nature released only a few weeks ago by an organisation called Vivid Economics that showed, for example, that the carbon price in a number of those countries was certainly more significant than in our own economy, and I think we need to get as much rigour into that sort of analysis as possible. So that's why we're getting the Productivity Commission to do it.
I'm surprised we don't have a lot of this already. I mean, the government's put in a lot of targets and a lot of legislative change. Presumably the departments of Treasury and Finance and Climate Change have collected a lot of that information, as well as already the Garnaut report we know compared ETSs, the Shergold report before that. Why the Productivity Commission?
Well, there is a lot of information and evidence around, but things are changing very quickly. Now, for example, last week after our multi-party climate change committee, we released a departmental paper that was quite an extensive one that is publicly available, that set out the factual position in relation to many countries and what they are doing. Ross Garnaut, having just released his climate change report in 2008, of course, is advising our multi-party committee as well, and he's observing that many things have happened over the last 2 years, and as a consequence we've asked Professor Garnaut to update his 2008 review, and he'll produce a further 8 papers outlining what's going on. And there's developments in the science, a lot of changes in the energy sector in many countries. So things are moving fairly quickly, and I think it's important in the context of putting a price tag on carbon pollution in our own economy that we have the best, most rigorous information available about effective carbon prices in economies with which we trade. So that's why we're getting the Productivity Commission to do this work.
Was this Tony Windsor's idea? He had previously mentioned he wanted more information on what the rest of the world's doing.
Yes, Tony Windsor raised this in the discussions with the Prime Minister and the Treasurer in the period that the government was being formed. So it was certainly a good idea on his part, and one that we were certainly ready to adopt. So there's a constructive role being played by the Independents and the Greens in all of the discussions that are going on. And the more information that we can assemble about what is actually being done internationally, the better. For example, of course, there's been reporting about President Barack Obama's comments recently that at a national level in the US, he couldn't anticipate an emissions trading scheme being prosecuted in the immediate future. But in fact, when you look at what is going on in the United States, many of the states in the United States have committed to emissions trading schemes at a regional level, and there's one called the Western Climate Initiative, which includes some of the major economies within the US, including California. They intend to start emissions trading by 2012. So there's a lot of activity going on in the US that sometimes gets lost in the reporting as well.
What if the Productivity Commission finds that an emissions trading scheme or a carbon tax, a direct price on carbon, is not the most effective way to reduce our emissions and cut our electricity prices?
Well, what the Productivity Commission will be doing is to look at the effective carbon price operating by virtue of a whole host of policies in economies with which we trade. That's their brief. Just today, though, in specific response to your question, of course, the OECD, in its report in relation to the Australian economy, has emphasised yet again that a market mechanism in the form of an emissions trading scheme, for example, is the most efficient way of going about reducing carbon pollution. And that has been the consistent finding for quite some years now of anyone who's looked at this issue in detail. We know that a market mechanism is the most effective way of driving reductions in pollution across your economy, because it helps find the cheapest, most economically efficient method of reducing pollution. And I don't think the Productivity Commission certainly would have any different view at all.
Well, if you look at the United States, we also see a good example. California is in particular of one of the easiest and quickest ways to reduce the pressure on our electricity generators and therefore lower the prices of electricity, and that's energy efficiency. And Australia has been a bit slow to move on this. Why aren't we mandating a national energy efficiency target now?
Well, a lot's been done in energy efficiency at a state and national level, but I agree there's a case for greater coordination and further steps at a national level. And to that end, in the last term of government, the government commissioned a report that has been presented to the Prime Minister, and which the Prime Minister and I released several weeks ago.
And that suggests a mandatory target, but you're not committed to that yet.
Well, we're going through those recommendations now and consulting with state governments and other stakeholders about the recommendations, and obviously we'll have more to say about that. But you're quite right, energy efficiency is very important. We're trialling something in the Hunter region actually at the moment. That's a good practical example of what can be done, and perhaps can be done on a much wider scale, and that is a smart grid, smart city project. The Commonwealth's put $100 million into it, along with private sector partners led by Energy Australia, and it's going to be using digital technology in an effort to vastly improve the energy efficiency in the distribution grid in the region, and do it in partnership with many thousands of homes who are going to be asked to volunteer to be involved in the trial. And essentially it's going to be trying to make sure that at places in real time where there are peak demands for electricity supply, the electricity is available and we're able to redirect it, if you like, from the grid to where it's needed at any point in time. And our system currently doesn't cope with that very well.
Okay.
It's also going to try and improve the efficiency with which we can feed renewable energy into the grid at the time that we need it. And there are big step changes like that we can make in our electricity market that will improve our efficiency significantly in time.
And just briefly, Minister, there's been political criticism of your cash for clunkers scheme. The government's already delaying it for 6 months. The opposition says you should scrap it. Will you have another look at these schemes, depending on the findings of this Productivity Commission inquiry?
Well, that's all very cute from the opposition, of course. They are opposing a market mechanism that is opposing the most economically rational way of reducing carbon pollution in the economy, and putting it all on taxpayers' cost with a pick winners so-called direct action approach. They don't have any credibility to be commenting on anything much.
Minister, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Greg Combet is the Minister for Climate Change and Energy Efficiency. It's 7:45 on RN Breakfast.